BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Fridays, I talk to you guys about DB Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And in this episode, I will be responding to the live streams from DB Cooper Sleuth and Eric Ulis, looking at a new article that was written by Pat Boland on the website Negotiable Currency, and of course continuing with the Cooper Profile segment, which is all about the psychological profiling of skyjackers. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about DB Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. So, firstly, I would like to share the results of a poll that I created. Frequently on Cooper Friday, I also release a polling question that is available on the Black Box Online Radio post page, and I do this for the other shows that I talk about here, such as the Zodiac Killer and Jack the Ripper. And I asked you guys, what happened to DB Cooper after the jump? And I was very surprised by the results. 42% of people said that they thought that DB Cooper survived the jump and escaped through the woods by trekking on foot. That's not exactly the surprising one, but 36% of people who responded to the poll said they thought DB Cooper died during the jump, that he was either a no-pull or he did not survive, and that one of the two outcomes led to DB Cooper passing away shortly after he jumped out of the plane on November 24th of 1971. And I think that these polling questions are fascinating because it really shows that they don't represent what I see in the comments section. When I'm interacting with you guys in the comments section, most of you seem to think that DB Cooper survived the jump, and also in the Facebook groups and when I have conversations with people about Cooper, the majority of individuals that I talk to think that Cooper survived. And I think that all of these, other than a no-pull death, would require some amount of trekking through the woods on foot. But then, getting to a boat or getting to a car, getting to a motorcycle, those would be the primary modes and methods of escape, primary methods of transportation. You can respond now if you want to the polling question, but this one was from last week, and the real reason why I wanted to share it at the beginning of this week's Cooper Friday segment, he died, no pull, or didn't survive, was actually way out in the front. When I first posted this polling question, I was shocked that almost everybody was voting for that one, and then over time a lot more people voted for trekking through the woods. But sometimes, I think it's interesting to look at how people respond to the DB Cooper case and the other unsolved mysteries that I talk about here on Black Box Online Radio, and also so that we can see that not everyone in the comments section is representative of the people who listen to this show, as well as who follow the unsolved mysteries. A lot of people hold back their opinions, and sharing these ideas in the polls is a good way for everybody to just let me know what you think and let the public know what you think. So please look out for some more polling questions here on BBOR in the post page. And once again, I also talk about the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and the Black Dahlia murder. So, as for today's episode, some of you might remember that I did an episode recently called The Flight Path. So the flight map that you're looking at right now, is that, just going to be the same thing over and over again? No, not at all. Because there are two new live streams that came out. One of them came out about 2 weeks ago on Eric Ulis' channel, and I've gone through a lot of the Cooper Vortex podcast from Darren Schaefer, and also a lot of the DB Cooper Sleuth channel from Ryan Burns. But I haven't gone through Eric Ulis' Facebook and live streams as well as his YouTube live streams extensively, and he has released a lot of them over the last, 30 days, so I decided to listen to one that was put out about 2 weeks ago, because Eric Ulis has been talking a lot recently about how he believes that the DB Cooper drop zone is not where people think it was. And when we're getting to the flight map, for the longest time, he was a proponent of the theory that the flight path was wrong. DB Cooper skyjacks the plane going from Portland to Seattle. In Seattle, he gets the $200,000 and the 4 parachutes. Then they're flying to Reno, Nevada. And DB Cooper jumps out into the night somewhere, never to be seen or heard from again to everyone's satisfaction. And Eric Ulis was of the belief that DB Cooper must have jumped somewhere close to Tina Bar in Washington State, as opposed to more where other people think, like at Battleground Orchards, or perhaps Ariel, Washington, La Center, Washington. And Eric Ulis has backtracked from that, and instead of saying that the flight path was off, he's now saying that the drop zone might be off. And I wasn't completely sure why. So I was going through some of his other live streams, and he's laid it out very clearly, in one that came out about 2 weeks ago, that it's simple. We have not found any definitive evidence from DB Cooper's jump in the areas where people are looking. Not the briefcase bomb, not the parachute, to everyone's satisfaction. Some people claim they have found the parachute. Not more of the money, not something like Cooper's mystery bag, not DB Cooper's body himself, to all the people who think that DB Cooper died during the jump. Well, where did his remains end up? So Eric Ulis began looking at a possibility of DB Cooper jumping much farther north than people expected. And another reason for this is, he encouraged everybody to look at the flight map. He was like, put flight map into Google, DB Cooper flight map, and you should see the large yellow flight map with timestamps and signatures. And I'm like, all right, interactive live stream, I love it. I'm following along with that. Let's look at the flight map and see maybe where DB Cooper could have jumped. And one thing that Eric Ulis pointed out is that we do not know the exact time that DB Cooper jumped over Washington State. Some people even think that he jumped over Oregon, but I think that that's highly unlikely, and I'll explain why in a second. So, DB Cooper's on the plane, and Eric Ulis was estimating that DB Cooper may have jumped between 7:59 p.m. and 8:15 p.m. And I'm like, whoa, 7:59 to 8:15? Those are some pretty big differences, because the things that DB Cooper requested was that he wanted the plane to fly at 10,000 feet with the landing gear down, flaps at a certain angle, and to fly at 170 knots, which is approximately 196 miles an hour. Let's even say 200 miles per hour. So we're talking about a 15-minute, 16-minute interval, 7:59 p.m. to 8:15 p.m., and I'm just thinking, that's a pretty substantial amount of distance, because I am not a math person. All of you listeners to Black Box Online Radio will know that I am not a math person. So I put this stuff into the calculator. Firstly, I asked Google, if a plane is flying at 200 miles per hour, how many miles is it going to cover per minute? And, again, Google says 3.3. So then let's look at this using the calculator. If we're going to have 15 minutes, let's just use that, 15 minutes. 3 times 5 is 45, right? That one I could do. But 3.3 miles per hour times 15 minutes, 49.5 miles. If DB Cooper jumped at 7:59 p.m. versus jumping at 8:14 p.m., he would have jumped 49.5 miles away from, these two different possible locations. That's nearly 50 miles. Go ahead and walk 50 miles. Let me know how long it takes you. An enormous distance. And again, when I've been watching the DB Cooper Sleuth channel, run by Ryan Burns, he does an excellent job, and he has proposed much later jump times of around 8:12 or 8:13. Maybe 8:11 came up once. So, this stuff is not a small amount of distance. Again, if someone's going to say that DB Cooper's jumping 50 miles to the north, that means that the drop zone is 50 miles to the north, and the evidence should be located 50 miles to the north. And the place where Eric Ulis believes that DB Cooper touched down was called Pigeon Springs, or I don't want to put words in his mouth. He jumped over Pigeon Springs, Washington. And I do have to give a shout out to somebody in the comments section who responded to my last episode on the flight path. And this one is going to Nico Shalinagalanesis. Excuse me if I mispronounced your name, but that's the name of the poster here, who says, about proposing an alternative flight path. This is old information, right? The number one trusted DB Cooper investigator, Ryan Burns of DB Cooper Sleuth, has taken this down so many times, now that the flight path is so exactly that it can be ... Meaning that, to elaborate, that Ryan Burns has mostly provided explanations as to how and why the flight path is most likely accurate. So then, if this stuff about the alternative flight path going over Tina Bar is not accurate, how does that come to be? Well, Ryan Burns was on a live stream with John Limbach, who's the author of the book Where Was Skip, and it seemed like they started out talking about the promotions for CooperCon 2025, but they were also talking about why the flight path is most likely accurate, and that the pilots used a Victor 23 flight path, and the first one is that the flight path was recorded. It was recorded, and it was also followed by fighter jets. Those are very famous for not being able to see DB Cooper, that there were jets that were following the Boeing 727 that DB Cooper was on, but they did not see DB Cooper jump. But there are other things, that if you were to put this into Google, the DB Cooper flight path, very early on you will find something that will state that Bill Radicek, the pilot or co-pilot, was someone who took the controls manually. They got off of autopilot and he was manually flying the plane. This becomes the foundation for the alternative flight path theory, that they wanted to fly over rougher terrain so that when and if DB Cooper jumped out, he would land in a very unfortunate setting. But according, to Ryan Burns, that is an urban myth. The plane was on autopilot the entire time, and also that they had people documenting the flight path, so that is also going to be most likely going down Victor 23. Then Eric Ulis might have a point. Why is there no evidence that has been found? And I talk about this all the time. I'm of the belief that DB Cooper jumped with the briefcase. I don't think he threw his briefcase away. I don't think he threw anything from the parachutes away. I think he jumped with everything and was all secured to his body. Yes, it's a lot of gear, but I think he was able to do it. I think he landed. I think he survived the jump. Yes, he trekked through the woods for a little bit. I mean, I'm mostly undecided about a vehicle or a boat or like escaping on land or by water. I mean, I would really just have to get some more physical evidence as opposed to conjecture before I could put something like that together. But in terms of somebody jumping, much farther to the north, this is something that I think also just needs to be explained, not only by the lack of evidence. I talk about this all the time on Black Box Online Radio. I don't want to hear about what somebody did not do or something that did not happen. Let's look for the physical evidence. One possible explanation could be that DB Cooper landed, he survived the jump, and he buried certain items, and he took other items with him, and he got away with the money. I mean, after all of these years, if Cooper had lost the money, did it not show up? And all right, I will share another thing that I've thought about, not even for like a DB Cooper story or novel, just kind of like a wild daydream that popped into my mind once. What if DB Cooper landed on somebody else's property, and then they shot him and took the money? Okay, I mean, like, that sounds like something that might happen on The Simpsons or something like that with Cletus the slack-jawed yokel. But in terms of all seriousness, we don't have evidence to support things like that, and we can guess about things until the cows come home. But there really is not a lot of physical evidence. I totally wouldn't be opposed to Eric Ulis searching a different drop zone, but looking around Tina Bar and looking at, La Center, Washington, Ariel, Washington, Battleground Orchards, if all of these searches have been fruitless, why not look in a different location? But I do have major concerns about the time that Cooper would have jumped, and again, this is not just a small misstep. This isn't just something that is slightly off. These would be drastic things that would be off. I mean, the crew felt the pressure bump at a certain time when DB Cooper jumped. That might not have been recorded, but if I had to guess right now, I'm just going to throw something out in my own unfounded way. Say if I had to put a time on it, 8:12 p.m. and 30 seconds. Why not? But what do you think? Do you think it's possible that DB Cooper jumped much farther north to than expected. Do you think DB Cooper jumped in southern Washington, but near this new place, Pigeon Springs? I mean, I say new place. It's new to me. I confess, though, my geography of Washington state isn't the best because I am from West Virginia, on the other side of the country. And another thing that really surprised me, though, as a West Virginian when I was looking at the maps and everything was that DB Cooper had a very large amount of territory in southern Washington. Even though I've looked at a map before, and I used to have this puzzle in my house when we were kids that had little pieces, each in the shape of the 50 states, the tip of Washington state really goes very far down into Oregon. There's actually a much larger amount of territory that is in southern Washington than I had originally expected. But please let me know what you think about anything. Put your ideas in the comment section down below. And right now on Cooper Friday, I would like to switch gears and talk about that article from Pat Boland that was put out on the website negotiablecurrency.com. It is called, "These Are a Few of My Least Favorite Things," and it's talking about the clues in the DB Cooper case that don't quite make sense. And, I mean, I think that Pat has raised a lot of very good points here, and I don't want to read off the whole article verbatim out of fairness to her, so I will once again direct people to negotiablecurrency.com. These are a few of my least favorite things. The DB Cooper case is full of contradictions, coincidences, and conflicting information. While an entire book could be written on everything that does not make sense, I will highlight some of the most curious elements of this coldest case. Why was the plane so empty on a holiday weekend? Yeah, it says holiday weekend, because, I mean, you know, this is November 24th, the day before Thanksgiving, so that should count as a weekend. The way we count Friday night as a weekend night. I've thought about this so many times. I really have, because it's reported that DB Cooper was the only person who sat in his plane seat on the day before, on the day of the jump. Like on November 24th of 1971, the man using the name Dan Cooper was the only person to have sat in that seat. That means that the hair that they recovered from the headrest was most likely DB Cooper's. And I'm just thinking, this is the day before Thanksgiving and more people aren't traveling, more people aren't flying. I know that people can travel around in other ways and a lot of people have relatives that are close by, but I was still shocked to hear some things like that. And I also think that that is a very, very odd thing. Apparently there were usually lots of airline employees and families, but not on Flight 305. Why were strangers sitting together with all those empty rows? Absolutely. I thought about this too, because this was the subject of last week's Cooper Friday, when I responded to a different live stream from Eric Ulis when he was talking about how DB Cooper didn't know that he was going to get the back row all to himself, and if he didn't get the back row, he might have even aborted the mission. Well, why was it empty to begin with? Once again, not a lot of people were traveling, lots of open seats, open rows on the plane. Why? I have thought about all of this, and I do not have honest answers. I completely agree with Pat that these are the clues in the case that don't make sense. Next, how did all the passengers not sense that something was amiss when the stewardess is dragging a full bank bag down the aisle? Well, I mean, I don't really necessarily have too many comments on that. They probably did recognize that something was amiss. Maybe they didn't know what was going on, because it's a 36-minute flight, right, from Portland to Seattle. But that took over 2 hours because of Cooper's shenanigans. And I'm really just, I would expect that something was wrong if I were on the plane, but I wouldn't know what was wrong. And Pat Boland talks about that in the next point by saying, why did a 30-minute flight have enough fuel to fly around for more than 2 hours? And I would just expect that the plane had sufficient fuel, and if they didn't, they probably would have alerted Cooper, or they would have made a more impromptu landing. But the plane probably was already fueled to a larger capacity, and, I mean, the plane perhaps had enough fuel after being refueled in Seattle to fly to Reno, so their fuel tanks were probably large enough to hold that amount. I mean, I'm just taking a guess. And the next question is there something special about Thanksgiving Eve to hijack a plane? Yes, there is. And I'm going to get to that in the next segment here, which is the Cooper Profiles segment, where I talk to you guys about the psychological profilings of skyjackers. And normally, I begin with some of the writings of Dr. David G. Hubbard, but I want to come back to something that was discussed on the most recent Cooper Sleuth livestream, DB Cooper Sleuth livestream, that was done with Ryan Burns and John Limbach. And Ryan Burns was telling the story of the skyjacker Martin McNally, Mac, and about how he was born without the gene for fear, without the genetic predisposition for fear, like how some people are fearless. And I even remember this from being a kid about how I'm afraid of heights. And my cousin was once climbing up high and just jumping around on a ledge when it was actually a very, very large distance, a very high distance, when it would have been a very, very fatal fall down to the ground. And I'm like, you're willing to risk something like that? I'm afraid of heights. My cousin was not. And I really began to wonder, why are people different like this? Why do people have different type of senses? Not everyone is afraid of heights. And it turns out some people are not afraid of things at all. And I mean, with Martin McNally, it appears that he was just not afraid. And this is a genetic predisposition. And this is something that we explore a lot in the world of serial killers. As I said, I talk about the Zodiac Killer and Jack the Ripper. So to the regular listeners of Zodiac Monday, this stuff might seem like a broken record for you guys, but I always come back to it because I think that it's important. Recently on my Zodiac Monday shows, I was talking a lot about Dr. Ann Burgess, who made the claim that she did not believe that there were genetic predispositions to commit crimes like murder. Now, are murder and skyjacking the same? No, not at all. But she didn't believe that there were these types of genetic predispositions, and somebody who is in the same field would heavily challenge her. And his name is Dr. James H. Fallon. He wrote the book The Psychopath Inside. And he says absolutely everything to the contrary, that there are three major reasons why people become serial killers. And that is, number one, genetics. There's something in the genes. Number two is neurological functioning, that there is almost an irregularity in the way that their brain processes neurotransmitters. And also when they act on urges, they don't have an emotional response that makes them feel for other people. It's an irregularity between the orbitofrontal cortex and the amygdala in the brain. And the third one is child abuse. And the most important factor that would drive people to commit crimes like murder is child abuse. And who would I side with? Is there a genetic predisposition to commit crimes like murder, or is there not? I would side with Dr. James H. Fallon because this really is his area. And, he has studied thousands of brain scans, and that's what The Psychopath Inside is all about. And he actually learned that his brain is rather in the shape of and functions the way that a psychopathic serial killers would. But he was not abused when he was a child, and that allowed him to make certain conclusions about how child abuse is a very important factor. But I do believe that there are genetic predispositions to commit certain crimes. With skyjacking, yes, I think there are going to be genetic predispositions to commit all crimes. So that would also be something in the realm of skyjackers. And this brings us to the next point in Dr. David G. Hubbard's book, The Skyjacker, and I think that it's very, very relevant to everything that I was just saying. Because up until this point on Cooper Friday, when I talk about the book The Skyjacker, I'm telling you stories of skyjackers. Okay, this is a skyjacker named so-and-so, this is what he did, this is how he did it, these are the reasons that he provided, and these are the psychiatrist's observations about him. But now, we're finally getting to the point where Dr. David G. Hubbard is trying to assess personality and behavioral profiles of skyjackers. Firstly, he states that in the past they used to call it a personality profile, but that was more wisely altered to the behavioral profile, which we still use to this day. Behavioral profiling as opposed to personality profiling, I completely agree. It makes so much sense because it's so far beyond personality. Personality should be one aspect of behavioral profiling, and that should be a very large portion of the pie chart, actually, but it's not the only portion of the pie chart. Behaviors can encompass things that are well beyond personality profiling. But when they're trying to look at all the commonalities among all of the skyjackers that have been studied for this book, The Skyjacker, and this groundbreaking attempt to try and understand the mind of skyjackers, one thing that they encountered was that it's actually really dealing with a very small portion of the population, and they do use this in the book. Out of 100% of people who fly on airplanes, 100% of the passengers, only 0.5% of the passengers have the personality traits and dynamics and behaviors that would be in line with a skyjacker. Only 0.5% match the profile. And that means that 99.5% of people who are passengers on airplanes do not even have these types of criminal tendencies to begin with. So that's a very interesting observation. Not the most eye-opening or helpful, but I mean, it's very interesting all the same. And another thing that Dr. David G. Hubbard noted was, not every skyjacker is the same. And he actually noticed that 25% of the skyjackers that he studied didn't fit into the typical mold or behaviors that the other 75% did. And on Cooper Friday, when I do this Cooper profile segment, very frequently I talk to you guys about how there are people who commit skyjackings that often had an alcoholic father, an overly religious mother, they experienced some form of child abuse when they were growing up, and they also were an underperformer in life, maybe connections to the military, connections to aviation. All right, that might account for 75% of people. And also, how about the dreams that they have? They have dreams where they are falling and they are paralyzed, and then they do not frequently have dreams when they are flying. But so many times during this Cooper profile segment, I have talked to you guys about exceptions to the rule. I've talked to you guys about how, wait a second, all of the early skyjackers had these behaviors. Now, this skyjacker seems to be an exception. He really is not like the other ones. Dr. David G. Hubbard was completely aware of it. 75% of the skyjackers really seem to show similarities in their upbringing, in their behaviors, in their personalities, in their life experiences with child abuse. And then about 25% of them really did not. So what's the next step? And that is that looking at how and why the skyjacker thinks. And there are some very, very Freudian things that come up in this next section in the book. And that is that Dr. David G. Hubbard begins comparing skyjackers to murderers and rapists and people who commit suicide. And perhaps I should tone down my language for YouTube now and say grapists and life enders. People are often using different terminologies to try and avoid censorship these days. But that is what's being focused on in the book. And what he's saying is that people who commit certain crimes like rape are trying to dominate somebody. There's a very famous expression that rape is not about sex, it's about power. And this is something that is done where someone is not only thinking, I can get control of somebody, but to all of the people out there who can do this legally, I can do it illegally. I can have what you have, but I don't have to follow the law to get it. These are all underlying structures, mind you. The stuff that people might be thinking about that they are not consciously aware of. So then, that brings us to the next point. What about people who take their own lives? Same story. Even that can be viewed as an act of power. That might be done under distress or duress, and someone who's committing rape might be a cycle of abusive behaviors. They can be functioning very differently, but there's still an act of power all the same. And it's the same thing, though, if somebody is going to be committing murder. They might not even be thinking about this when they're committing the crime, but they're trying to get control over somebody else by taking that other person's life, ending that person's life while they are still alive. The commonality among all of them is power. So with the skyjacker, it's all the same. The skyjacker wants to have power. And there are some symbolic things about how somebody is committing a psychological act of rape by taking control of the airplane and so on. And I find that those are a little bit harder to comprehend as someone who is just reading the book, The Skyjacker. But also, I think that the ultimate commonality is power, right? That's what people want. But what's the difference? Do you remember that I said that there is something that sets skyjackers apart from serial killers? That sets skyjackers apart from murderers and rapists and people who take their own lives? What is it? This is from the verbiage of Dr. David G. Hubbard, not mine. The skyjacker is only flirting with the subject, not actually doing it. Look at somebody like DB Cooper. Did he kill anybody on the plane in 1971? No, but he threatened to do so if his demands were not met. Did DB Cooper commit rape on the plane? No, not to our knowledge. Did DB Cooper, take his own life? Again, not to our knowledge. If anything, DB Cooper had put forward measures in place acting like he did not want to take his own life. So what are they doing? Flirting with the concept. They aren't actually doing anything, even with the fact that Cooper's taking the plane hostage, even with the fact that any skyjacker is holding up the plane and they're saying that, oh, I want to be flown to this place, I have these demands. But here's an interesting note. They are not actually flying the plane. They're not even doing that. So they are not actually performing the actions. And this is really just taking a step back. A skyjacker is somebody who is committing the crime, but they aren't up close and personal and involved with the acts of destruction and the acts of, illegal behavior. Instead, they're directing other people to facilitate the acts of behavior, and this is going to be done in a way where the skyjacker believes that their actions are not sinful. Sinful is the word used in the book. They are doing this in a way where they believe that their actions are really not so bad. I'm just doing this for the money and so on, and they're not going to these extreme levels that other people are doing it, and they're not even going to strong levels. DB Cooper gave a note to the flight attendant and says this is what's happening. They are orchestrating the destructive behaviors, and even worse, they are orchestrating the threat of destructive behaviors as opposed to actually committing the destructive behaviors themselves. Now, another point that Dr. David G. Hubbard explores in the book is why. Why would somebody do this? Why would somebody act like this? What would drive DB Cooper to commit these types of actions? Why did DB Cooper set up the skyjacking at all? And a main commonality in his research is that somebody was desperately driven to do this, that there was a type of emotional desperation that was going on. And as somebody who has read through all of Dr. David G. Hubbard's case studies for the Cooper Profile segment here on Black Box Online Radio, I've noticed that, they may have thought that they were under the duress or something, and that they were desperately driven. They may have believed that they were desperately driven to commit these types of crimes, but a lot of them really were not in that desperate of situations. Some people were just dissatisfied with their lives. They were living with unsatisfactory conditions, and they thought that this was a way to change things. Now, that's not desperation. That's somebody who may have convinced themselves that they were desperate, so they were committing an act such as a skyjacking, which they believed was not harmful because they're not actually committing the murder or committing the type of more horrible crime. They are doing something that they just thought could facilitate a means to the end. And ultimately, I think it's a very fascinating way of looking at how skyjackers think. With DB Cooper, I tend to think that maybe there was a much stronger component to desperation in Cooper's life. I told you guys very clearly once on the Cooper Profile segment that I thought if he actually was committing the skyjacking on November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, it comes back to Pat Boland's question. Why would somebody do this on the day before Thanksgiving? Does this have a symbolic reason? And I said, just using the clues from the book The Skyjacker and looking at the evidence and reading all of these statements about mental duress, if anything, I would say that DB Cooper was someone who was married and separated from his wife and or children. I'm not completely certain that DB Cooper had children, but somebody who was maybe a divorced individual or a divorced dad would have some type of grudge for not being with his family on Thanksgiving, so he resorted to the act of skyjacking as a way to just act like he was committing a crime. He didn't really need to do that, but he convinced himself that he needed to do that. And also all of the stuff about aviation, he knew things about airplanes, he thought he could get away with it. A predisposition to commit a type of crime like that? A genetic predisposition? Absolutely, I think that was present. But let me know what you think about anything here. You can put your ideas in the comments section down below. What do you think about the flight path? What do you think about the drop zone? What do you think about the clues in the DB Cooper case that don't make sense? And what is your response to this week's Cooper Profile segment? One more time, I do other episodes on Black Box Online Radio talking about the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, the Black Dahlia, and recently I started a segment about the disappearance of Maura Murray, which comes out on Tuesdays. I also release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio. They also come out on Facebook and Instagram. On Facebook, you can get them under the names Ned DeHaan and Black Box Online Radio, and on Instagram, blackboxned88. And the images that you see going by for this program are archived at True Crime Designs on Facebook. True Crime Designs. You can also download the audio version of this program for free on Spotify or Apple Podcasts under the names Black Box, True Crime, or Black Box Podcast. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And I'll see you on Monday, though, for a new episode about the Zodiac Killer. And that'll be all for me now. So everybody have a wonderful weekend. Let me know what you think about DB Cooper. Please respond in the comments section down below. And until next time.